Hello and welcome to our special series, The Finance Ministers, which starts today on CNBC TV 18, where we put the spotlight on the men and women steering their states through this current period of crisis as they battle the COVID pandemic. The state of Tamil Nadu has emerged from elections with a new DMK government at the helm. Recently sworn in as the Chief Minister, M.K. Stalin has his tasks cut out, with the state featuring among the top 10 in terms of the total COVID caseload as well as active cases. A day after being sworn in, the Chief Minister has announced 4,000 rupees in cash as relief for families who hold ration cards and are affected by COVID. He also said the state will bear expenses for all COVID-related treatments to state government insurance card holders in empaneled private hospitals. The state's healthcare infrastructure is stretched like most parts of the country. Currently, a lockdown is enforced, but hundreds thronging a hospital in Chennai to procure the antiviral drug remdesivir. The state has also asked the central government to increase the supply of drugs like remdesivir and medical oxygen. To tackle the crisis, the new chief minister will rely on a 33-member cabinet. One appointment has stood out, and that is of P. Thiagarajan, the state's finance minister. PTR, as he's better known as, is a global finance sector veteran and alumnus of the MIT Sloan School of Management. He's worked with global financial institutions like Standard Chartered and Lehman Brothers. Settling the state's GST dues with the centre will be high on his list of priorities. Also bringing down a high fiscal deficit of almost 97,000 crore rupees will be in focus. Joining me now today is P. Thiagarajan himself. Mr. Thiagarajan, appreciate you joining us here on our special series, The Finance Ministers, and congratulations on your new appointment.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the opportunity.
Well, let me get straight to it, Mr. Thiagarajan. This is a difficult period for the country. It's a difficult period for various state governments, including yours. You come in at a time where you are going to have to deal with the impact of the second wave. Tamil Nadu is a state that's been hit hard during the course of this second wave. Many economists that we've been speaking with are talking about the fact that we are now faced with a crisis of livelihoods, and it is now time for both the centre as well as state governments to focus on the second wave of relief measures. But given the state's finances, how much fiscal headroom do you find yourself with to be able to do anything more meaningful?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways to look at it. I think if you look at it relative to what the finances of Tamil Nadu were, let's say, for the period between 2004 and 2014, 2004 being the anchor when the FRBM Act in Delhi and the FRA Act in Tamil Nadu were passed, relative to that kind of 10-year period, our finances are in a very poor shape. As an opposition MLA and the lead speaker on the budget every year for the last 5 years, I have highlighted how we have continuously deteriorated and how a lack of leadership has resulted in a lack of fiscal discipline and a rapid deterioration of both revenue deficits and therefore interest load, which has gone up from something like 11-12% of revenues to something like 20% of revenues. So on one hand, we have a serious problem. On the other hand, if I were to compare this deteriorated state of Tamil Nadu's finances to Delhi's finances, meaning the union government's finances, or to the finances of many states in the country, we are not yet that badly off. We are probably hovering around 25-26% of GSDP in the total debt. And as I say, we're hovering around 20% of revenue and interest payments. In my opinion, these are correctable. So these are, of course, they're not correctable in the normal course of events. These are not things you can gradually fix. You're going to have to do some restructuring. You're going to have to do some asset sales. You're going to have to do some once in a lifetime or once in a generation or once in a government kind of measures. But then other governments do it all the time. The government of India, Union government of India, is continuously selling assets to plug the hole in its budget. So I don't think we are yet in a place where we really ought to not do what's right. As you pointed out, almost every economist everywhere in the world suggests that you must stimulate demand at this point. You must get money into the hands of people, particularly the poorest, weakest sections, who are most likely to spend it. Not only is it relief for them, but it gives you a greater multiplier effect in the economy, and it lifts demand, which is really the weakest part of the economic kind of spectrum now. So I think we're doing what conventional economic theory would tell us to do, which is getting money into the hands of people.
Let me pick up on each of those things. You said that, you are faced with a difficult situation, both in terms of fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, bad revenue management, bad debt management. These are legacy issues that you have inherited, which you are now going to have to correct. Now, what are those correctable measures that you intend to focus on? If you can list for me the priorities that you intend to focus on. And secondly, in the context specifically of the COVID crisis, beyond the specific measures that have already been announced by the Chief Minister on day one of taking office and taking oath, what else can we now expect in terms of relief?
Yeah, listen, I think it would be premature 4 days into the job and ranked, fairly low. I'm a second-time MLA. I've only been in politics for 5 years. For me to be presumptuous and talk about the party's overall kind of position in the indeterminate future, my leader will set the tone for that. But I will say two things. I will say that we are, in some sense, a state that has resilience. We are capable of dealing with these kinds of things because we have hard assets that we can sell. We know how to do restructuring when we have to. We want to bring down the interest burden and we want to kind of make it more manageable. So one part of that is a one-time fix. The other part is to go back to the days when between 2004 and 14, roughly 11%, 10 to 11% of the state's GSDP was the government's revenue. Now that has slid before COVID to 7%. Of course, it's not rocket science to figure out why it has slid. So I've been already doing some studies before we came to government. And now with access to data, I'm doing even more detailed studies of which slice on which head, what reason have we gone down and lost nearly a third of our revenue. And I don't just say this, the CAG report says it. The RBI says it, the 15th Finance Commission says it, that Tamil Nadu, which used to be a revenue surplus state, has now become a revenue deficit state. So I'm not trying to be kind of the innovator of all innovators here. I just want to get back to good practices that we had before. And it happens to dovetail nicely with the social justice philosophy that we come to government with. Because if you find that the state's role in the economy is keeping on shrinking, if you find that you've lost 3.5% of GSDP in the state's revenues, surely that has not evaporated into thin air. That means that has gone into some other hand without the state's redistributive of public goods and services kind of benefit. That means we have inherently increased the economic disparity in society. So these all happen to fit particularly well for us. And my leader will tell us exactly how we should go, but I make it very clear that our philosophies are twofold. One, our social justice philosophy, that is a political and a kind of cultural philosophy, has to be implemented in economic terms. Otherwise, there's no use. You can't have one political philosophy and a different economic philosophy. And two, that we will do what everybody says, which is at this point, you must stimulate demand and you must get money into the hands of the poorest, weakest sections of society.
Let me address the issue of stimulating demand at this point in time. You've already announced 4,000 rupees as a COVID relief measure. What else can we expect in the near term to stimulate demand, especially in the context of how COVID is impacting not just urban centers, which have already been hit on account of the lockdown, but also the rural economy, and rural distress is picking up in this wave?
Yeah, so I think my leader, the Chief Minister, signed 4 economic relief bills on the day of coming. So, of course, there's 2 ways to stimulate demand. One is to actually put cash into the hands of people. The other is to let them keep the cash they have rather than shell it out for things that otherwise come back into the state. So the 2 things, on both sides. One, we have given 2,000 rupees as the first tranche that starts on the 15th. And then the second tranche is going to come in early June. And so there's continuity of payments. And as far as leaving them with more of their money in their hand, he has cut the price of milk down by 3 rupees a litre, which is universal. It's not a rural or urban thing, because much of the milk is bought through the Tamil Nadu milk cooperative called Avin. We have made bus travel free for women, or the leader has made bus travel free for women on all urban routes where they go to work. So that leaves them more money in their hand. They don't have to pay for the transportation when they go to work. And as you say, we have included the COVID medication treatment inside the Chief Minister's medical insurance scheme, even if obtained at private hospitals. So, both these steps are effectively increasing the spending power of the average citizen, particularly the poorest and weakest, who tend to spend a greater percentage of their income or their assets.
Right. How much is all of this going to cost the exchequer? And also, if you could take me through what the state's position now is as far as vaccine procurement is concerned, because the central government, in its affidavit to the Supreme Court, has made its position clear that differential pricing will incentivize the private market, and hence states must continue to pay a higher price than the centre. Now, we don't know which way the Supreme Court will move on this. The matter has been adjourned for later this week. But given that this is now the price, what is it going to cost Tamil Nadu to be able to procure vaccines? What's the plan on that front?
Yeah, so maybe I should first stay within the bounds of my role. I am not the procurement officer. I'm not the health minister. I'm not the person who makes these policies. But I can tell you that Tamil Nadu had been managing its own kind of vaccine procurement and drug procurement quite well relative to other states and relative to our needs, till the central government imposed itself and said, we will be the one that will allocate. So we have this dichotomy in the centers kind of functioning. When it comes to remdesivir or antivirals, they say only they will procure and they will allocate to us. They made us cancel our purchase order that we already had in place, or effectively they took it over. On the other hand, when it comes to vaccines, they say, no, you go and buy on your own and you bid against each other and you pay a differential price. So this seems, at least on the surface to most rational people, an inconsistent kind of philosophy of how federalism ought to work. But, the cost of these things is, people sometimes lose scale. So the entire 2,000 rupees per person this month plus next month or per card of 2 crore cards is about 8 or 9,000 crore cost. You put in all the other subsidies, we're probably talking about another 8, let's say 5, 6, 8. You talk about getting a vaccine. Let's take the worst case. We pay 300 rupees a vaccine for, 8 crore people. What is that? Another 2,400 crores. So these numbers relative to the size of Tamil Nadu's economy, which is about 20 lakh crores or should have been last year without COVID, or its budget, which is about 3 lakh crores, is not exactly a huge kind of, insurmountable mountain relative to the fact that, as I say, the government has lost 3.5% of GSDP in revenue, which, as the CAG report points out, or the 15th Finance Commission points out, is roughly 60 to 70,000 crores. So there is 60 to 70,000 crores in mining, in excise, in taxes, in other things that the state is not doing a good job of making sure its revenues are received. If we can receive those, surely I can spend this plus double this and not have a problem either liquidity-wise or debt levels-wise or interest coupon-wise.
Yes, you're saying that you will find the money to be able to go in for vaccine procurement, but you're also pointing out the inconsistencies in the manner in which the central government is centralizing the allocation and procurement of drugs like remdesivir versus vaccines that are in use for COVID-19. Let me talk about something that you've mentioned a few times since we started this conversation: asset sales, and that seems to be the focus of the central government, and perhaps it's likely to be one of the key priority areas for you as well. Is it going to be one of the big revenue mobilizing themes?
No. Unlike the central government, I'm not, the Tamil Nadu, most states have not been in the business of asset sales historically. And certainly I'm not looking to make it a way of life. I'm just saying we have reached a point where the debt to GDP ratio, and much more worrying to me than the debt to GDP ratio, is the interest to revenue ratio. I mean, just think about that. If you have gone in 7 or 8 years from 11 paisa of every rupee of revenue it goes to interest to 20 paisa of every rupee of revenue goes to interest, particularly when your non-discretionary costs of salaries, pensions, and non-wage operations and maintenance already suck up something like 70-75% of your revenue. Even in the best of times, they were 60-65. Now you got the problem that the denominator, which is the total revenue as a percentage of GDP and as absolute number, keeps declining, and the interest cost keeps increasing. So you're stuck in this vice-like debt problem. So this we got to fix. I'm much more worried about the interest payment than I am about the debt itself. We're, as I say, a big state with a lot of assets. We have probably among the highest English-speaking, globally focused, educated workforce. The gross enrollment ratio for higher education in Tamil Nadu is by far the number one in India. It's at about 48% compared to the Indian average of about 23, 24%. And the next state behind us, which I think is Kerala, some 30-something percent. So we have a fundamental structure which will make us much more resilient. But it is the short-term problem I have that every rupee we earn, even were I to bring the denominator back to 10% of GSDP, we will still not get back to the 10, 11% of revenues that was going to interest payments. So to bring that down, it will be a one-time thing. I don't think it's something that we're going to get into the habit of. We have reached a point where we need to restructure our debt because we need to reduce the interest burden. And we are looking to do things that we have not done before because we are not in a situation that we've been in before. This is a once in a lifetime or certainly once in a century, kind of pandemic. The last time was the Spanish flu in the 1918, 1920 period. So we have to think out of the box.
Well, you know, when you say that you have to think out of the box, let me ask you this in the context of what you said you intend to do in terms of taking forward the social justice philosophy of your government and what that could translate into in terms of economic policy. You've defended social welfare measures, saying that not all freebies are necessarily bad. But in the context of what you've been able to assess for yourself, as well as the recommendations that have come in from the 15th Finance Commission, which has also talked about rationalizing several centrally sponsored schemes, as well as looking at schemes at the state level. What do you think deserves to stay? What do you believe deserves to go?
Look, first of all, I think the word freebies is a misnomer. I mean, it's a poorly designed and ill-fitting word. I mean, we give free food, or we give cost-free food to children at schools for lunch. Is that a freebie? The central government alleges that it gives cost-free gas cylinders to people. Is that not an equivalent freebie? So, you know, when the 15th Finance Commission was here, I presented on behalf of the DMK, Mr. N.K. Singh and team. And at that time, Mr. Somnathan, who's now the Finance Secretary, was the Sherpa for that committee. And I asked them, how do you decide what is a freebie? You know, one man's freebie is another man's essential social spending. So the notion freebie itself, I think, is slightly wrong. And the hypocrisy of saying, when you do it, it's a freebie. When I do it, it's great kind of, public service, I think is rampant in the central government's approach in these things. But I'll go to the second issue. The issue over here, I don't think is, radical notion. It is that we want to keep inequality down. We want to have inclusive growth. We want to let everybody participate in this, which means that, just take a benchmark, right? If you take the best kind of quality of life, least inequality countries, let's take Scandinavia, or let's take Australia, or let's take, certain states in the US. The budget of the government is somewhere between 25, 30, 32% of the GDP or GSDP. We are barely scraping at about 13, 14, 15. So if you are 30%, that means you offer free health, free education, free maternity leave, free transport, etc., etc. That's not a bad outcome if you can do it well. So I think that, it's what I am saying is more explicitly tying our economic philosophy that has always been implicit with our social justice philosophy, and we certainly wouldn't be the only people in the world doing it. Whole countries all over the world do it, and certainly the places that have the highest quality of life, and in some sense the highest per capita standard of living, Western Europe, Northern Europe like Scandinavia, Australia or Singapore, certainly follow the same philosophy. It's not a radical philosophy.
No, it certainly isn't a radical philosophy, and you're right in pointing out that there are welfare measures that are required for equitable distribution, as you point out. But I want to address one of the other challenges that you're going to have to deal with. You're now going to represent the state at the GST Council. We don't know when the GST Council is set to meet.
Sorry,
but
we don't know that yet.
There has.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we don't know that yet.
You don't know that yet?
No, it's not been announced yet. The Chief Minister has not yet made the decision. If you take the last government, for example, it was represented once by Mr. Thiagarajan and once by Mr. Jayakumar, neither of whom were in the finance seat. I mean, Mr. Thiagarajan was never in the finance seat, and Mr. Jayakumar was briefly for a few months in the finance seat. So, I mean, most people would think that the finance minister is the default choice. I just want to point out that technically it has not been announced yet who will be the representative.
Okay, technically it's not been announced yet, but assuming that you do represent the state in the GST Council, what do you believe the challenges are now going to have to be for the Council? There has been a lot of back and forth on the issue of compensation. The deadline for compensation is set to end next year. Given the way that the COVID pandemic has hit both central as well as state finances, what do you believe the challenge is going to have to be for the GST Council going forward?
Well, let me just say that I don't think I'm any kind of pioneer or innovator, right? The Finance Minister of Kerala, Mr. Thomas Isaac, in the last 5-year term, the Finance Minister of Punjab, the Finance Minister of West Bengal, among others, have been very clear and very lucid about the problems and the kind of fairness issue, as well as many other politicians. I would go one step further and say that GST in its inherent design is not, in my mind, anywhere near long-term stable. There are too many problems with it, and again, I wouldn't be the first guy to point it out, but I think we need a fundamental rethink of some of these things. Then you go to the third level and you say, if you have a contractual obligation that you must pay these things, then surely a time of crisis, the most difficult concept I have is somebody talking about invoking force majeure, which didn't exist in the contract anyway, or in the law. But force majeure is in a private relationship where you say, because the world doesn't exist in the old format anymore, because it's a flood or a tsunami or an earthquake, I don't have to keep my monthly payments between my insurance provider and the car or something, or I don't have to go through and pay you for food that I'm not buying. It is beyond any logic to use the notion of force majeure in a central or union government to state government relationship. It is precisely during a crisis that we need the funds, right? So your constitution is written in a way that all direct taxation, and with the advent of GST, the bulk of indirect taxation powers lie effectively with the Union Government of India. When you have that as the basis, I think it is actually showing a lack of compassion and a lack of consideration for you to now, try to invoke clauses that don't exist, right? And again, I don't want to go too far on this point, but with a man like Mr. Somnathan, who's sitting as finance secretary, surely he knows from his global experience that rating agencies can be talked to. You can explain to them. You can go through and show how it's in the long-term interest to do the right thing. So this maniacal focus on keeping some arbitrary number when you already have 3 years of central government budgets where tens of thousands of crores of debt were hidden in the Food Corporation of India and this and that and whatnot, which have now, and the National Small Scale that has been brought back onto the balance sheet to make it look like COVID relief in the 2021 fiscal year, then surely, you in finance, you can make anything look like anything. And you can sell almost anything if it's a proper risk and return story to the rating agencies and to the markets. I don't think the government, the union government, should be taking these kinds of relationship costs with the states for this little money, relatively speaking, this little money, a few thousand or a few 10,000 crores out of, GDP that's, I don't know, $3 trillion, right? So somewhere I think the scale issue relative to the relationship value. I mean, in finance, only 2-3 things matter in finance, right? I spent a long career in finance. One is risk, the other is return, the third is relationships, the relationship of trust. The relationship probably is more important than risk and return. And so, it is short term to damage relationships because you think you're doing something technical, which can be easily solved 100 other ways. Right? I mean, I was in Wall Street through the derivative boom of the credit derivative and associated kind of indices and tranches and whatnot years. You can make anything look like anything. It's not very complicated.
Well, perhaps some of the problems that we're faced with is because we've previously made anything look like anything. But let me address once again the short-term issue.
Anything taken to an excess will lead to problems. I'm not suggesting we should go to that. But I'm saying when you have a sovereign country with 1.4 billion people, which is in itself a huge risk factor for the global economy if it doesn't get its pandemic under control and if it doesn't get its economy back on its feet. Surely the rating agencies and the other kind of major countries and economic powers of the world understand that and kind of realize what the relative cost benefit is to them, let alone to you.
You know, since you talked about risk factors, one of the big risk factors that global investors are looking at this point in time, and of course domestic investors as well, is how quickly we're going to be able to get out of the current state of play in terms of lockdowns. Now, while there is no national lockdown, we're virtually in a mini lockdown because state after state has imposed its own restrictions, including a state like Tamil Nadu. Do you believe that perhaps another fortnight or so before we can start to see an easing of restrictions, or do you believe that this is going to have to be the state of play for a prolonged period of time? If yes, what is that going to mean in terms of industry?
Look, maybe I'm an outlier here, but my own view is that it is not the lockdown or the duration of the lockdown or the date of the removal of lockdown that is our greatest kind of risk factor from a global investor's perspective, right? Investors want stability. They want clarity. They want continuity. They don't like to see countries where the rule of law seems to be amendable or seems to be pliable. They don't like countries where the justice system is not predictable. They don't like countries where there is not a timely resolution in a kind of precedent-based way. They don't like places where an individual's will can change the outcome. Right? Having a stable, transparent, predictable, functional dispute resolution, judicial, legal, what happens after the investment fails? How quickly can I get my 60 or 80 cents on the dollar back? These are the things that drive investment. And those are profound, basic things. And I would argue, and again, I wouldn't be the first guy, many people have argued, that we have deteriorated on those scales quite a bit. So yes, in pure numbers, our global investments and FDI and FI and all look better than I would have expected, or better than they did a little while ago. But you must remember that the world is in a liquidity glut. If we are up 10 or 15% in FDI, FI, the rest of the world is up 30, 40, 50%. The global central banks, at least the OECD central banks, still have somewhere around $5 trillion or $5+ trillion of excess liquidity in the global markets than existed in 2007 before the crisis. So we lose track of some of these things and we go on like surface stuff. And I think there are more profound things at play. And long-term investors are sophisticated, right? They have been many places. If you're happy to take hot money, of course it comes and goes. But then you got the risk. It came yesterday, it'll go tomorrow. But if you're looking for stable long-term investors, then you got to provide the milieu. You got to provide the environment that gives them comfort and confidence, and uncertainty and kind of swaying to which way the wind blows of institutions, of the courts, of the regulatory bodies is not giving them that confidence. In fact, it's destroying their confidence in the investment kind of potential of India.
Let me end then by asking you, since we're talking about stability, continuity and clarity being the pillars that global investors will seek, in the context of what the centre has announced with very large number of PLI schemes across 13 different sectors, etc., what will your government focus on to draw in investment, both from domestic as well as foreign investors?
Look, I think, again, I don't want to get into specifics. It's not my role. I'm only a few days into the job. The leader sets the direction and we execute. But I will say that relative to most parts of India, we have 2 or 3 major strengths in Tamil Nadu. The first, as I said, is an English-speaking educated workforce. The second is a very, very empowered and very affluent Tamil diaspora. We're going to announce in the near future a big fundraising effort to help with vaccines and drugs and so forth. And you'll see it will be phenomenal kind of levels of contribution. I would say also that at least in the current circumstances, as I pointed out to somebody earlier, we have, Tamils with the kind of the love for Tamils is sitting in the right places in India today. The finance minister is a Tamil, the finance secretary is a Tamil. The RBI governor is a Tamil Nadu cadre officer, of course, now past the IAS, but spent 30, 40 years and is a fluent Tamil speaker. So I think, relative to other parts of India, we are still going to be relatively well off. I don't think it's appropriate today, and given my, lack of seniority, I'm 5 years into politics. My leader's been doing it for 40 or 50 years. He sets the direction and we execute what he says.
Well, Mr. Thiagarajan, we wish you the very best of luck. You do have a daunting task ahead. If you appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18 as you take charge of the finance portfolio and set the priorities on bringing the state back in terms of revenue as well as fiscal discipline. Appreciate you joining us here on the Finance Ministers on CNBC TV 18.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, with that, we'll take a break. There's a lot more coming up. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a moment.